book, Eating Cow's Brain Cause Prion Disease and Are Other Organs Good? Look, some people probably are fine with organs. Some people maybe not. I usually say, what did your ancestors consume? I'll give you an example. The Irish consumed a lot of cod liver oil. As a consequence, they're down-regulated. So let me just step back. All humans are adapted to muscle meat, a small amount of organ meats, and some coastal or river fish. But primarily the muscle meat is the majority of what they consumed. That's what the N15 data and all of the other data shows us. So that's baked in. We'll clear that aside. Now, in the last 10,000 years, some of us acquired varying levels of adaptation and tolerance to some contraindicated carbohydrates, but also we've consumed specific animal foods in specific combinations, which has affected certain types of enzymatic pathways. As an example, pastoral populations, 24% of Europeans today that have got a high level of those pastoral Indo-European genes tend to have an inability to absorb sufficient calcium. I've done a video recently on that. So they need to consume far more. Now, our traditional ancestors would have just, with vitamin D from the sun and eating the ruminant flesh of animals, would have extracted more than enough vitamin D. We know that if you eat sufficient protein, you will uptake more calcium. There's literature for that. There's quite clear, good literature covering that point. And if you take and you combine that with vitamin D, you'll increase that even further. So calcium deficiency is impossible in those people. But if you're one of those 25% of people that have had strong pastoral background, then because those people consumed slightly more than the average tribal person would have traditionally, that gene had to be downregulated because they were taking in far too much calcium. And so the genetics were adapted to reduce the intake. Same with the Irish. Too much cod liver oil, down-regulating the ability to convert beta-carotene because they were getting more than enough retinol from the cod liver. So as a consequence, we've had certain types of adaptations. And so the requirements for organ meats, the requirements will vary between the population. I usually say to people, look back and find out, get an old cookbook of your own ancestors. That will usually tell you what people ate, what sort of intake they had in terms of organ meats or other things. And that should be what, without doing genetic tests, should sort of guide you to an extent. Now, prions are an interesting thing. We don't know enough about them in terms of prion disease. And the only time a prion disease actually emerges in a cow is if you feed it the flesh of animals. And it was basically animals that had some sort of disease, which were, I believe it was lamb, and it was munched up other animals. They actually fed the actual cows and caused them this problem. See, we have prions in ourselves. There are prions in all animals, and usually they're not a problem at all. But if you basically consume species inappropriate foods, then you can actually have some derangements in the way the type of molecules that end up emerging in those animals. That's where sort of the problem lies, in a sense. And that's why they banned a lot of this sort of stuff, the feed, and they went back to a more, grass or a more plant-based feed in order to eliminate this problem from the cow population, and it worked. So now in most countries that isn't a problem. You would have to check with your health authorities to find out whether the stocks in your country, whether there was an issue. If there was an issue, then I would give brains a miss, because you don't know what's in the supply. Simple as that. Other organs won't be a problem, but brains could be a problem potentially. So in countries where there's never been any issue with cows because they haven't actually fed them inappropriate things, then in those countries I don't see a problem with the people consuming cow brains at all. They're a good source of cholesterol, and but in the UK and a few other places, I'd be a bit more cautious. Let me put it that way. Simple as that. And as I said, organ meats are not a problem. Excessive amounts, maybe. Small amounts, not an issue. And some populations require more, like my ancestry consumed quite a lot of organ meats. And I have a downregulation of the beta carotene side, not to the level that Irish do, but I do. And I have downregulation of the choline pathway and a few others. And as a consequence, some of the nutrients in organ meats are things that I require, because many of my ancestors consumed quite a lot. The west coast of Greece is considered organ, sort of like an area where organ meats are consumed heavily. So my requirements are different than many others. So I may consume some organ meats, but I do have genetic requirements for them and adaptations. Other populations have less of that, and they can extract, they can take the carotenoids from the animal fats of the ruminant that's eaten grass. They can convert those to retinol. They can do all that sort of stuff. So it's less of an issue. So tell me your genetics, and then maybe I'll be able to tell you exactly what's probably a good idea and what's not for you specifically.